Hey everybody, welcome to this amazing session that we have lined up for you today, how to measure success in the age of AI. Today, I am very pleased to be joined by Nathen Harvey. Nathen, hello and welcome to the stream.
Hey Jack, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm very excited to have you here, Nathen, and we have a lot to cover today, but hopefully we can get through everything and tell these wonderful folks that are joining us on LinkedIn about a bit about DORA, a bit how the DORA metrics apply to Salesforce, and some of the really interesting things that came out of the latest survey. To give people a bit of context, Nathen, for people that haven't heard of DORA, what is DORA?
Yeah, for sure. So DORA is a research program that's been running, it's been running for over a decade now, and it is research into how do we build and sustain high-performing technology-driven teams. DORA really wants to understand sort of the capabilities and conditions that create that high-performing teams and allow us to thrive over time. DORA has its sort of center of gravity around this idea of software delivery performance. And so that's a thing that we measure, and it helps us get insights into lots of other things. Each year, DORA publishes a report. We call it the Accelerate State of DevOps report. And we're very happy to have GearSet along as a gold sponsor for this year's research and report. Thank you for doing that. Like I said, I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's an honor to support a industry leading bit of research. Every year there's always something new and something that's really changing the approach to how we do things. And there's two things in the report this year that we're going to dive into a little bit more in this conversation. But AI, of course, it's unavoidable at this point, highly pertinent to the Salesforce ecosystem with Agentforce and everything that Salesforce are trying to do there, but also platform engineering, which hasn't really come up too often in the past. And you're out in San Francisco at the moment, speaking about platform engineering quite a bit.
Indeed.
So the timing here is impeccable. For folks in the ecosystem, we focus on four metrics as it pertains to software delivery. The DORA metrics have become the industry standard in how we measure software delivery performance. Tell me a little bit about those and what we're seeing in the latest research.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to do so. And in fact, I just might go to some visual aids as I talk through that. First and foremost, as I mentioned, we publish a report each year, so I would encourage you to go grab that report. We'll be talking about some of the findings from it today, but we certainly don't have time to cover all of it. You can grab it at that QR code or at dora.dev. You can download the report. So when we think about measuring software delivery performance, the first question that I always want to answer is why? Why do we care about software delivery performance? I mentioned that it's kind of the center of gravity for DORA. It sits here in this green box, software delivery performance. You see it there. The reason that we measure software delivery performance in our research, what we've seen over the years is that software delivery performance is a good predictor of outcomes that we all care about. Outcomes like organizational performance, things like profit and revenue and customer satisfaction and the quality of the products that we're shipping and so forth. But it's also predictive of good outcomes for the people in our organizations, the well-being of those people, things like, having low burnout, having high job satisfaction, and so forth. So we want to improve our software delivery performance so that we can get those outcomes. But DORA also has this question of how do we improve that software delivery performance? And that's, again, where our research digs in and we look for the capabilities and conditions that enable teams to have that great software delivery performance. And at a very high level, we look at those as a climate for learning, having fast flow, and fast feedback. So this is kind of the high level. And in a second, I'll jump into exactly what those four performance metrics are. But I just want to understand, Jack, I'm not a professional Salesforce administrator. I have done that in the past, but it's been more than 15 years since I was doing that. So does this sort of resonate in a Salesforce environment?
Yeah, for me it does, and that's a little interesting nugget of information for for the folks that are watching this. Is that once upon a time ago you were a Salesforce administrator, so
Indeed.
it's really interesting. I think more than ever in the Salesforce sphere, we are becoming concerned or more in tune to how we're feeling in the ecosystem. Especially one of the things in the report that's come out about the developer experience and reducing burnout through delivery best practices was a really interesting piece of the research for me this year. Focus on that developer experience is something that I talk about a lot and really encourage people to look after their teams. I'm really interested in that key outcome for teams that are adopting DevOps best practices, something that's passionate to me. I think over the last 6 years that I've worked at GearSet, we have seen increasing numbers of organizational performance across the board to the 4 DORA metrics as well. And I think that from the case studies, when GearSet speaks to our customers and says, what has your experience been like since you adopted some of the tooling that has helped improve your delivery capabilities, whether it's just how fast you can ship to production or reduce the number of times that you have failing deployments, that has real tangible business impact and outcomes. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, these metrics, though somewhat tricky in Salesforce to measure sometimes, are really integral to the performance of teams.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into what those metrics are, those software delivery performance metrics. And as you mentioned, there are 4 of them. When we think about measuring software delivery performance, we really want to look at sort of 2 high-level concepts: throughput and stability. So yes, you want to be able to move fast, move changes through your system very quickly, but you also want those changes to be stable when they land in the production environment or the production organization. You don't want to be breaking things all the time. So the 4 metrics that we look at answer these 4 questions. How long does it take for code to go from committed to working in production? And that's our lead time for changes. How frequently are you updating production? That's your deployment frequency. When you update production, how frequently do you have a little moment where you need to quickly roll back that change or quickly push forward a hot fix? Something's gone wrong and it requires immediate intervention. We would call that a failed deployment. So we look at the change failure rate, looking at all the deployments that you've done, how many of them failed and required an immediate fix or a rollback or something like that. That's your change failure rate. And then finally, when those moments happen, and they do happen, how long does it take your system to recover and get back to working as normal? And when I use the word system there, I mean the systems, for sure, the technology pieces, but also us. We're part of the system, the people. It's sort of that socio-technical system. Now, taken together, we believe within DORA, and what we see in our research is that these metrics can apply to any application or service that you're responsible for updating. That could be Salesforce.com. It could be the mobile application used by your organization. It could be the front-end website of your organization, a retail banking application, anything, any type of software. We also see in our research that throughput and stability are not trade-offs of one another. They tend to move together. So in order to be stable, you have to be able to ship quickly. And then I think finally, the thing that also is really important to remember is the level at which we're measuring these. We aren't measuring these at the organizational level. Instead, we're measuring these metrics at the level of an application or service. So you might think of your Salesforce implementation as one application or service. You certainly wouldn't want to compare the metrics that you're seeing in that context to, say, the metrics that you're seeing for your mobile application or for your mainframe backend system. You're going to see different results across those 4 metrics, so it's not really worth comparing. But what is important is to understand sort of how you're doing today as a team on that application and what can you do to improve that. Now, you mentioned that it can get a little bit tricky with these metrics as you think about Salesforce. How is GearSet approaching measuring these, capturing these metrics, and so forth?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So we have over time looked at these metrics and how so the lead time for change is a really interesting one in the Salesforce ecosystem. You mentioned how long does it take for customers to commit code into your VCS and for that to then get out. The interesting thing is there are still many Salesforce teams that don't use a VCS system. So it's hard to track where did that feature as it first existed, when was that feature complete? Especially as there's a lot of iteration on the platform too. Is it from when you do the first bit of work and it's committed or then deployed to its first testing environment, and then it goes through multiple levels of Salesforce orgs before it reaches production? Is it that point, or is it the point where it reaches between UAT and production? And these are some things that the folks in the Salesforce ecosystem, I think find fairly challenging. At what point do you define a feature is complete? How long does it take to run through that cycle? The team at Gearset have built analytics and reporting capabilities into the platform to be able to pull some of these metrics out, and it's something that we are actually looking at making easier for our customers to understand and have a little bit more visibility across their pipelines. I think in Salesforce, our teams want to understand a little bit more, is the thing that's been built actually relevant for the ticket and the business outcome that they've designed the feature or the functionality for. You look at deployment frequency again, so those throughput metrics are two of the most interesting ones to me. Very rarely do we see a Salesforce team that releases new updates to the platform daily. They work in a two weekly sprint is most common. Teams that adopt Gearset often move to a week if the business allows it. There's so many constraints, especially as it comes to the users that use Salesforce. When can you actually deploy? We don't have an option to do blue green deployments on the Salesforce platform. Right. There is one production org. So when we think about being able to roll back changes, it's not as easy as switching back like we would at Gearset. If something goes wrong with the Gearset application, we can switch back to blue or green, whichever was the last stable version. So the nuances of the Salesforce platform, I think, make some of these metrics challenging to understand a little bit better. However, what we have seen in the Salesforce ecosystem, Gearset, other tools out on the market there, really giving Salesforce teams the confidence to move fast and break things, if that analogy is still relevant these days. And we have a lot more tooling in place that allows us to have that confidence. If something goes wrong, we can roll backwards or roll forwards. And I think Salesforce is one of those ecosystems where good tooling can bail you out a little bit better than other platforms that are out there. So yeah, it's an interesting place to be, just because of the nuances of such a unique platform. If you remember your days as a Salesforce administrator, some of those challenges. What's interesting to me, Nathen, we talk about tooling and how different products approach some of these issues. Platform engineering was a big part of the report this year, and some of the rise of platform engineering as a discipline in teams. Can you tell us a little bit about platform engineering and the relevance of that these days?
Yeah, for sure. This was the first year that we really looked into platform engineering as a construct within the DORA research. And as you mentioned, it's sort of this emerging trend that's happening across organizations around the world, organizations of every size. Of course, we see platform engineering emerging more so in larger organizations. But before we dive into many details, we have to first kind of define platform engineering. And for us as researchers, this is a real challenge, because when you say those words, platform engineering, it can mean something very different depending on which person you're talking to, which organization you're thinking about. Some organizations have dedicated platform engineering teams, some do not. And so as researchers, we really wanted to kind of get to what are the underlying characteristics of a platform? And let's kind of understand what those are. And so we think about them as sort of a shared set of capabilities. Those capabilities are both technical and probably people capabilities as well, right? It's not just the tools themselves, but it's a shared set of capabilities that are used by more than one application. And it provides, its goal really is to provide consistency for that developer experience across different teams within an organization. It's to help with scaling. If we take, I don't know, let's take a piece of infrastructure or like infrastructure management, and we push that out and ask everyone to handle that on their own, there are different scaling mechanisms that we have than if we were to centralize some of that infrastructure management, as an example. And so we wanted to really understand through our research, how is platform engineering, first, how is it being adopted? And then second, what are the impacts of that? And whom is it benefiting and so forth? So that's really what we dug into this year around platform engineering.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Platform engineering, it could be easily conflated with DevOps. It's a
Yes.
bit different, a bit different. But one of those things that resonates for me about platform engineering in the Salesforce ecosystem is when a Salesforce customer looks to purchase GearSet or one of the other DevOps platforms out there, they're really giving them a blueprint for success. They're giving them a tool that is capable of handling the challenges of deployments and something that is ultimately going to scale with them and make them more successful. And I think that's largely why you do see initial big improvements in teams that do invest in DevOps practices and say, hey, we've set this thing up, we've set this tool up, or we built our own process using GitHub and GitHub Actions, or created our own deployment pipeline. Just follow these steps and you'll be taken care of. And I think that's some of the real power that tools like GearSet have given the Salesforce ecosystem. So you can I almost, when I think about platform engineering in this space, think we kind of do that. We're kind of enabling that for Salesforce teams, which is really interesting. One of the other interesting things is how the declarative Salesforce developers, so your traditional admins versus traditional developers, tooling might not, that buying a tool might not be the best thing for a developer, but for a declarative admin, it can be really powerful. But
Mhm.
giving them a platform that has like the CI/CD capabilities, so that if a developer still wants to commit code into a VCS, knowing that a tool like GearSet is going to pick it up and move it through the pipeline, they can still execute in a way that makes sense for them and a way that they're comfortable with. Whereas an admin can then use the capabilities of GearSet to help them with deployments. They don't want to code in the command line, but the developers can still do that. And I think that's one of the big powers of investing in these things.
Yeah, and I
And
think sorry, I think that's really one of the sort of foundational ideas behind why you have platform engineering. It's to reduce that cognitive load, or maybe to better distribute the cognitive load that's required to build and deploy and run an application. We want our developers focused on those development tasks, and we don't necessarily want to ask them to take on the cognitive load of, well, how does this change get into production? Like, let's offload that to the platform. Sometimes, there's certainly a phrase in the industry of shifting left, right? We want to shift security left. We want to shift testing left. I think with a platform, another phrase that's sometimes used is shifting down. Let's shift some of that capability and that cognitive load down into the platform. And I think that's really, really important.
yeah, absolutely. Speaking of speaking of cognitive load, something that we
Yes.
are using these days to reduce the cognitive load on ourselves and on our teams is AI. What what did we find out in the report about AI and how AI is having an impact on that throughput and stability for our teams?
Yeah, for sure. So first and foremost, we looked into AI again this year. We looked into it a little bit in the previous year as well. But what we're seeing is widespread adoption. Lots and lots of teams and organizations are starting to pick it up. And in fact, we kind of see this happening at both levels, both from the top down. What we see is a lot of organizational priorities shifting to focus on AI. How are we using AI? How are we bringing AI into our workflows? How are we using AI to better serve our customers? But we also see it happening at sort of the grassroots or the practitioner level, where we see so many practitioners are using AI regularly and relying AI regularly on a bunch of different tasks. Tasks like writing code, summarizing information, writing documentation, writing tests. The list goes on and on, but we're seeing widespread adoption. Now, adoption is one thing, but as you sort of alluded to, what's the impact of that? Well, what we found in our research was that there are some really good impacts on the individual, on developers and other practitioners. First, they have higher job satisfaction, less burnout, higher productivity, higher self-reported productivity. So that's some really good signals. And this kind of makes sense. Look, as an engineer, I like to play with the new things, and there's new technology. I want to get my hands on it. If I have the ability to play with it and sort of understand how that's working, that's really good. We looked at some things like, what about trust? Do you trust the code that's generated by AI if you're using AI as a coding assistant? And what we found there was that, not surprisingly, the answer was mixed. Some people report pretty high levels of trust or some level of trust, but about 40% of our respondents reported low or no level of trust in the code that's generated by AI. Now, on the surface, 40% might seem like a lot. Frankly, I think, we're engineers. We're kind of skeptical by nature, and we shouldn't trust something that came out of an AI immediately. You can't just ask an AI for something and then ship that code to production without doing anything else. I think it really is a signal that we need to continue to build those feedback mechanisms, whether it's automated testing or code reviews, etc. We need to have those feedback mechanisms in place. We also saw, though, some really positive outcomes across sort of team level or application level concerns. Things like documentation quality were improving, code complexity going down. Now, there's an interesting way to look at that. If we look at what do people use AI for, oftentimes we're using AI to summarize documents, to give us, sort of the TLDR about
Yeah.
whatever this document says, right? Well, documentation quality improving is interesting because, yes, we might be using AI to write documentation, and I certainly have done so myself as an engineer. Like, documentation isn't the number one thing I like
it's,
to do,
it's not
right?
not high up there.
It's not high up there. It's not high up there. And worse than having it not be high up there is like a blank page and having to start there is even worse, right? So at least with AI, if it generates documentation for me, maybe it generates documentation that's bad enough that I get angry enough that I'm going to go fix that documentation. That's good. Like, that's in the end, that's a net win for our teams and our process. So AI, yes, is going to help us generate documentation, but it's also helping us with getting better utility out of the existing documentation that we have, right? So if it can summarize information, if it can find documentation from disparate sources and bring that information together for me, that's also a net win. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic where it can be helping both improve what we already have and helping us create net new. That's super fun. But
Yeah.
when we look further, and like those are two kind of pretty good positive outcomes, like the future looks bright for AI. But when we look at software delivery performance in particular, we actually see it starting to falter as you're adopting more and more AI. Throughput goes down a little bit and stability goes down even more significantly. Now, our data doesn't really tell us why. Why is that happening? We definitely have some hypotheses. I think that leading among those hypotheses is that we're using AI a lot and focused very much on using AI to generate code. Well, generating code or creating changes, whatever that looks like in your environment, creating changes is important, but it's the ability to reason about those changes and get them all the way through to production that is even more important than just creating the changes, right? And so I think this really points to an opportunity for us to improve potentially even the use of AI throughout that entire life cycle. How do we use AI to get faster feedback through maybe automated tests or other avenues on the changes that we're proposing? How do we use AI to help us in the code review process and the approval process and even the risk assessment process? Hey, here's the change that we're going to send out. What are the possible things that could go wrong? How risky is this change? How much care do we need to take when making it?
Yeah, I find the most interesting thing about AI in the space that we're in now is not just where you might use AI in your delivery process. So one of those things that makes sense to me is, can we use AI to auto generate pull request descriptions and comments based on the code that you've done? Does it relate to the user story, etc.? That's really interesting. But the thing for me is how much is our software delivery lifecycle being impacted by trying to implement AI applications? Do we know how to effectively test them? Do we know how to actually deploy that configuration and make sure it works in a production environment? You know, one of those things about AI is or generative AI is now, and widely regarded AI is inherently non-deterministic. And so much of DevOps and DevOps best practices is about repeatable outcomes and about repeatable expected results. It should work this way. Does it work this way? Yes, we can move ahead and we can deploy it. But that's not the case with the actual applications themselves sometimes. And I find that to be the interesting relationship about where we are now. Where is it pertinent in the development lifecycle? How do we deploy AI applications themselves out into production? I don't know if you have a view on should one take precedence over the other? Should we be focused on actually being able to deploy AI applications, or should we be using AI in a delivery process?
Oh, it's a really good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I have a strong perspective on which should you prioritize over the other. Unfortunately, it's probably a yes and. We probably need to do a little bit of both, right? So I think though that it's a really good point that you raised, because as you mentioned, we've got non-deterministic behavior now, and that changes how do we evaluate that. And those models, not only is it non-deterministic sort of when you're testing it, but it continues to be non-deterministic once you've shipped it, right? And things change over time. The models may improve, they may degrade, but the other thing that changes is the way that we're interacting with them, right? So even if you put new AI capabilities in front of a customer, it's going to take them some time to learn how to best interact with that, right? So over time, I think both our capability as humans to interact well with the models is going to improve while the models continue to improve. So I think it's really interesting there. But I think, if I had to pick one of the two things to prioritize, whether incorporating more AI into my own workflow or building more AI-enabled applications for my customers, I think the answer is kind of in the question: who are your customers, and what are the things that they really value, and what can you do to better serve those customers? Sometimes it means you need to be able to respond more quickly to customer feedback. So let's say you're making updates to your production environment 4 times a year. That might not be sufficient. We maybe need to update our production environment once a month for those customers. Let's focus on capabilities and building up capabilities and practices within our team that will allow for that. And other times it might be that the best way to unlock that next feature set that your customers need is through building out those AI-enabled experiences for them. And again, the answer is probably yes to both. And prioritizing is always a challenge, but understanding your users is the best way, I think, to start framing how are we going to make those decisions.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that a lot in our space now with Agentforce. So Agentforce is all the rage in Salesforce these days. We're going to be hearing about this for the foreseeable future, just as the tooling itself becomes better, and how the folks implementing Agentforce on the Salesforce side are getting more familiar with the technical nuances of the platform. And that's one of the things we at GearSet are really focused on for the folks that are building AI agents and AI-based applications. How do we make sure that they're able to incorporate the deployment of those applications into their usual software delivery lifecycle? How can they still make sure that they can handle those metadata changes in Salesforce and get them to the right environment? And I'm pleased to say that, shameless plug here, but we're doing a pretty good job of that so far. And we are seeing GearSet customers deploy their Agentforce applications with GearSet successfully. And I think what you've said is totally right. What are your customers trying to achieve? What are your customers trying to do? How do we better serve them? And then look at what are we doing? How are we approaching things? And is there use cases for this? Do our customers expect AI in our platform to be able to do their job more effectively, or do they just care? Do they do they care or not care that it's being done by AI? They just care that the tool can do what they need to do. What's the outcome that they want to have?
Mhm.
And that focus on what really is the job to be done in any software development or in of itself. Can we make sure that the outcome of this feature or functionality is actually serving the person that's going to be using it in the best way? Let's get it to them. So it's really exciting time for all of us. But it's really I think it's really interesting about that slight decrease in throughput, and that slightly higher change in the stability metrics.
Yeah.
And that while it decreasing, I would predict probably that we will see maybe in next year's report, the report after that, we see an improvement in those figures once we become more familiar with what we're doing, as it has accelerated so fast. I was speaking at a conference on Saturday, and this technology wasn't a year ago, was barely conceivable to where it is now, and here we are. Of course, we're not going to understand the ins and outs of how these things work with full confidence right now, but we have to. One of those things about DevOps best practices is continuous incremental improvement and understanding what we're doing and making improvements to that over time. What's that phrase you like to use and DORA like to use? Is get better at getting better. Is that right?
Get better at getting better. That's right. Because this is it is a journey of continuous improvement, and I think you're spot on there with this, new technology, new process, new approach with AI. We should expect to see some dips. In fact, in the course of our research, we've seen this happen time and time again. Early on in our research study, cloud was really gaining traction. And what we saw was that a lot of teams had early successes with cloud, and then there was a dip, and then it kind of comes back. And you've got to, we call this the sort of J curve of transformation. We've seen it with cloud technologies, we've seen it with security practices, we've seen it with reliability practices. It's really no surprise that we're seeing it now with AI practices, that you see some initial gains and then a dip. And it's probably too early for us to have a whole lot of signal for what does it look like on the other side. But I think that's another reason that we're really excited about AI, is that we have done some early research now as it is just starting to gain some traction. We'll be able to look at those trends across the industry over time, and I think that's really important.
Of course. I wanted to move on to another core part of the survey, and something that I think is very resonant for Salesforce teams now as they've become more familiar with the tooling and some of the practices. And one of the challenges that I face often or hear often when speaking to Salesforce teams is how do we collaborate effectively? How do we make sure that we're all pulling in the right direction? And I was wondering if there's anything that you've seen, Nathen, and I don't know, over the past year maybe, where we've made significant strides in that, or some best practices that folks might not be aware of.
Yeah, I think collaboration is kind of it's the key there, right? I think that if you look at the history of the DevOps movement, right, it was born out of a need for better collaboration. Like when DevOps was born, you had developers on one side of the house, and there was this wall of confusion, and then you had your operators on the other side of the house. And DevOps was really about how do we come together to collaborate. And I think over the years that umbrella or that tent has gotten even bigger to include more than just developers and operators, but everyone sort of involved in the process. And one of the things that we look at in our research is that everyone includes the users, right? And how focused are you on the users, and really understanding what a user needs. And so we call these teams user-centric teams, teams that really try to understand not what's the greatest technology that I can use to go solve some problem, but rather what problems am I trying to solve? And the only way you understand what problems you're trying to solve is by having a good understanding of who your users are, what they're trying to accomplish, taking their feedback and using that to help reprioritize your roadmap and the things that you're building and so forth. And what we find in our research is that teams that put the user first, like, they have the best outcomes overall. They're the ones that are driving the most success. They have better software delivery performance, better organizational outcomes, better well-being for the people on the team. all of this really matters. And that requires collaboration, right? If I'm building something in a Salesforce world, like who are the users of that Salesforce application that you're building? And what is it that they're trying to accomplish? Frankly, as a software engineer, some of the biggest strengths that you bring to the table are understanding sort of the domain and having that domain expertise. If you're working in Salesforce, maybe you have some domain expertise around what does it mean to go and sell our product, or maybe you have some domain expertise around what does it mean to do customer support for our product or customer relationship management over time for our products and for our customers. If you don't have that understanding, it can be very easy to just fall back on, well, here's the new tech, I'm going to play with that. We have to understand why and what we're driving what we're driving towards. And to get that best understanding requires collaboration. It requires working with salespeople. It requires working with marketing people. It requires working cross-functionally across the organization to get that best understanding.
Yeah. If user focus is so important, and what you're saying is highly resonant. And I find with the Salesforce platform, there is so much that you can do with it. There is so much that you can customize. It's like, okay, you built this really cool thing, but how does that relate to the business process or the actual day-to-day life of the person that you're serving? One of those. Let's talk about roles for a second here, because in Salesforce we have business analysis, we have Salesforce admins, developers, architects, and on the DevOps side, release engineers, release managers, maybe. Then we have product owners, platform owners, all of these different roles, and having a nice stream and thread of communication across all those different people to make sure that you're pulling in the right direction is kind of difficult. And I don't know if there's any particular methods that you subscribe to for communication or recommends. Like I'm a big advocate of Slack, and over communication is better than no communication. You know, if it's there, then people can talk about it. If it's not there, then they can't talk about it, or they don't know what's going on in your head, or what have you. Stand-ups and things like that are one of those things that you often hear. I don't know why we have a daily stand-up anymore. Like it's the same thing that we said yesterday or the day before. Nothing big changes. So I don't know, Nathen, if there's anything that you see regularly about the most successful teams and how they communicate and how they collaborate.
Yeah, I think that it is very context specific, but there are definitely some patterns that I see and some ways that I use when I engage with customers and teams that are trying to improve their software delivery performance. I think probably one of the most effective things that we do is in the area of value stream mapping. When it comes to understanding how does a change go from the developer's workstation all the way through to production, it's really helpful to bring together all of the people that are involved in that process. As you mentioned, you've got architects, you've got release managers, you've got developers, you've got product people. Let's bring them all together, and actually on a whiteboard or on a wall with some sticky notes, let's lay out, what does that map look like? What are all of the handoffs that happen with change? What are all of the tasks that have to happen? In doing so, inevitably, we find surprises in the room, because unfortunately, our work doesn't necessarily enable that high level of collaboration all the time. So when we pause for a moment and bring everyone together to collaborate and map that out on the wall, there are aha moments like, oh, I do this thing and then I hand it off to you, but then you do the exact same thing because you don't have visibility that I did that thing already to this particular change, whatever it is, right? And so finding that is really important. You'll oftentimes find waste or waiting in the process where people just aren't prioritizing work to help it get through the system. So using a value stream mapping exercise is really, really powerful and can be super insightful in helping determine what should we focus on next, because that's always the biggest question. Every single one of us, I know everyone that's watching, hello. I had a look at your to-do list this morning before you joined. It's longer than you have capacity to complete. I know that. I validated that with everyone that's watching right now. So how do you prioritize becomes the important question. And I think finding those bottlenecks, finding the waste in the system is the way that you prioritize. Let's choose a thing that we're going to go and improve on. As you mentioned, we're in this process of continuous improvement, right? We're going to make a small change today that's going to make things a little bit better tomorrow. And then tomorrow we'll do the same thing. And when we do that over time, that's how we really start to feel the benefits of these improvement processes.
Yeah, I feel that we're a long way from the waterfall and the Big Bang improvements of old, right?
Yes.
For me, I've not really ever experienced that. I entered the world of software when that was kind of on its way out, and you very infrequently see waterfall style things. We do a release every 3 months or every 6 months or what have you, and the high pressure and the high stress that comes with those releases, making sure everything's tested to the nth degree so it can ship. And this notion of the DevOps and the notion of continuous improvement and incremental improvement to a system is, I would say, in Salesforce 6 years ago, it was they were still slow. 2 weeks every a deployment every 2 weeks was fast back 6 years ago when I joined GearSet, and we're realizing that 2 weeks is now more of the industry standard. Some teams deploy every 3-4 weeks, but anything longer than that doesn't really exist anymore. And that's something really interesting that comes out of our state of Salesforce DevOps report that we do every year. Teams are moving faster, and I think that does have a lot to do with how these teams are collaborating across their ticket management system and having a better understanding. You mentioned our domain expertise earlier, actually, and that's one of those things where Salesforce does have more domain expertise and niches now than what it might have previously on specific clouds with specific products in the Salesforce suite. And as teams have started to specialize, I think they've realized they need to communicate more to all pull in the right direction. So I think we're over that hump where, but they're long gone are the days of what one person knows everything about the system or the platform or the opportunities. And that, I think that's an exciting space for us to be, especially if we are all committed to that continual improvement. Related to that, this improvement in communication, I feel that we've seen, and how teams are operating, developer experience, and you mentioned burnout at the start of the conversation, and we both did. Those elite teams and those happy teams, what are they doing to reduce burnout, and what are they doing to make sure that they stay on top of their workloads? You mentioned to-do lists being too long and you don't have time for everything. Do your value stream map and see where you're going to get the most incremental improvement at a time. What are those teams doing to improve that developer experience and have a better, healthier, happier team?
Yeah, I think that certainly the collaboration and the visibility of work is super important. Being closely connected to the outcomes of your users and understanding what they're trying to accomplish is really important. But I think you also touched on just now another thing that is really important, and something that we've seen consistently over the years, is that the teams with the best software delivery performance um, focus on flow of change through the system, right? You talked about having many different domains, maybe interested in, and many different job roles interested in changes to the Salesforce application. How do you prioritize those? There's going to be contention. The sales organization wants this thing, the support organization wants this thing. We only have so much capacity. You kind of have two choices. We could work on both of them a little bit and progress each of them a little bit forward, or we could prioritize one, get it all the way through the system, and then go back and take the next one and get it all the way through. And what we see is that minimizing the amount of work you have in process is super critical. So you really want to focus on completing work before you pick up new work. Get that all the way through to completion, then let's start something new. And studies have shown over the years that this is a much more efficient way of working, and you're going to deliver faster and in a way that people can better trust in your capacity to deliver change. And it becomes much easier to have prioritization conversations when we trust that coming out of those prioritization conversations, we're going to be able to deliver on the commitments that we've made.
Yeah, it was such a poignant piece of the report when I was looking at it. in terms of burnout reduction, that context switching that we all have to do a lot of. And since I read the report, I actually realized how much in my own work I context switch too much. Like,
Yes.
I'll be doing one thing and then I'll be distracted by something else. And it's hard to, so you mentioned like a flow state, that, Zen Buddhism kind of style principles, but it absolutely does apply to them. And an interesting statistic from the report itself said that 90% of teams experience drops in productivity when they have to context switch a lot. And I think it can be very easy in our space, Salesforce and outside of Salesforce, to context switch a lot, allow time for deep focus, allow teams to actually succeed at the thing that they are doing, give them the time to reach the end of what they're trying to do. And then you also have the added benefit of the feeling you get when you complete a big bit of work. I don't know about you, but when I complete something that I've been working on for a while, it's an immense feeling of satisfaction. So it seems like a double whammy benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also just relates right back to software delivery performance, right? If I'm an engineer and I work on something and I'm done with it and it doesn't ship for another 3 months, if something goes wrong with it, now I've got a context switch, not just from one task to the next, but I've got a context switch back 3 months to when I worked on that particular change and help troubleshoot that and repair it. That's really tough. It also goes back to platform engineering, and the idea of reducing cognitive load is also helping you reduce the context switching that you have to do. Today I'm a software developer, tomorrow I'm a release engineer. Today I'm a software developer, tomorrow I'm a release engineer. Stop that context switching. I'll allow for the platform to take on that load. So I think you're spot on there, that context switching. And look, we all do it. And we all, or at least more than half of us believe we're better than average at multitasking, which just statistically can't be true. And so just understand that, and prioritize that flow, prioritize that completion, because that dopamine hit when you check that thing off and you know that it's actually done, that's really good.
Yeah. It's those, we have something at GearSet where all of our releases are piped into a Slack channel, so you can see which features and which branches got merged, and that's now live in production. And I imagine for the developers that are working on those, they go, yay, my thing is now live and it's out there. And that happens for them every day. We release updates to the application two times a day. I mentioned earlier about the blue-green switching that we're able to do, and that allows us to release with really high velocity, which is pretty impressive. I joined 6 years ago and we were doing that 6 years ago, but to still be doing it, having scaled to 350 people now, is one of those super impressive things. And we have an amazing team that keeps all of that up and running for us as we've got bigger and the application has got bigger and better. It's really cool. To tie this point back to something that we have just been talking about in the collaboration, but the focus on the user needs as well. I think another thing that came out from the report that I found really interesting was that folks that are focused on user needs and the satisfaction that they get from actually interacting with those users and understanding that their changes actually have big impact on the users that they're serving can be a real motivator and a real driver for software engineers and admins and developers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen this many times throughout my career. I've seen, a software engineer that's working on some backend systems for, say, customer support, go and spend the day sitting with customer support and seeing how those users are interacting with the system. What are they doing? And inevitably that engineer comes back both energized. Look, what we're doing is helping solve real problems, but also with new ideas, new features, new changes that can be implemented that no one is asking for, but that engineer took the time to sort of build that empathy and observe what's happening. That gave them the insights on how we could improve the situation for those particular customer support engineers. That's just one simple example, but I think that idea of building empathy with your customer and really trying to get to know who they are, heck, sometimes even just using the product that you're building as if you're a new user, that can be really, really insightful in terms of what changes do we need to make, what things should we be prioritizing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting. My partner used to own Salesforce instances. She's owned 4 of them and be at 4 different companies and been responsible for that instance. And she always said about her time when she was doing that. One of the first things she would do when she joined a company, and throughout her time at that company, was go and, like you have just suggested, go and sit with customer support. And what she said she would do is she would just say, operate like I'm not here. Let me see how you do things. And that, I think, because we come back to your value stream mapping point of view, you can see that for yourself. If you have somebody do the job in front of you and you go, oh, that looks onerous. Or another example is, I had on my podcast a gentleman called John on my podcast, John Robinson, who works for Test Sigma. He was saying he was a test engineer and a testing lead, and he said to folks, do your deployments and do your testing and document every single thing that you do. And across 13 QA people, not a single one did the same thing. All 13 documents were different after that. And having that visibility into what an actual user experience like and a process looks like allows you to make those improvements and see what the best bits of how people operate and bring together a cohesive system. And I think that's one of those things. If you're able to use those analytical skills based on the information that's being provided to you, can be really powerful. And again, come back to gratification that you've actually made improvements for the better and for the betterment of your users.
That's right. And I don't want to be a downer, but there can sometimes be painful moments when you do that as well, because you've built the application and you have in your mind the way that the application should be used. And then you sit down and you see it being used in ways that are not that, right? And frankly, the people that are using the application are using it the right way. It may not be the way you intended. It is the way that works for them, and it probably is the thing that helps them get their job done. So as you're sitting and observing, definitely don't try to stop and correct the user's behavior. You might ask questions about it, but make sure they're open-ended and do your best to not be very judgy of them. Like, I didn't build the features so you could use it like that. I built it so that it would work like this. Look, they figured out how to use it, whether or not it was the way you intended.
Hey, that's interesting. Why did you do it like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
Something along those lines. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that new, again, come back to communication and better collaboration teams. Just no judgment, like approach every interaction with the best intention, and you'll get better results.
Yeah, that curiosity wins for sure.
Curiosity wins. I think that's a soundbite that I'm going to have to use over and over again.
Nice,
Nathen. We're coming up on time, but I'd love to give you the opportunity. If there's one thing that you want people that are watching this either live right now or played back in their own time, what's maybe one bit of advice going forward that you recommend everybody does as they approach their delivery practices, their teams, or how they operate in their workplace?
Yeah, I think it'll be general because I'm trying to reach everyone, but I think the real thing is to question the status quo. Why are we doing this thing this way? Are there opportunities to improve it, especially the status quo on things that hurt, on things that are less than enjoyable to do? Like, let's go investigate those, figure out what can we do to make them just a little bit better. And as we make them a little bit better, we'll take that investment or the return on that investment and invest it in something else that's going to make us a little bit better. So you're not going to change everything overnight, but you can make a small change today. So push back on the status quo.
That's awesome advice. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo either.
Exactly.
The positive discourse is a good thing. The discourse can be positive. I think would probably be the right way to frame that. And such great advice, Nathen. Where can people access the Accelerate 2024 DORA report?
Yeah, at DORA.dev, you can download the report and read a whole lot of other research that we've published over the years, and we're continually releasing more and more research. In fact, I think since the report came out, we've released 3 other smaller studies on artificial intelligence and some of the impacts and how do you help teams adopt it, build trust, better value their work, and so forth. So DORA.dev is definitely the place to go.
Perfect. Nathen, thank you so much for your insights. You have been an absolutely phenomenal guest, and thank you for all that you do for the wider developer community. Your work with DORA is really important, and it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. For those that have tuned in live, I hope you've enjoyed the last hour or so with Nathen and I. This recording will be available at LinkedIn. It stays in LinkedIn, so you can come back to this event and view it again, but we'll also be on YouTube, so you can check us out there with a bunch of great other content on the GearSet YouTube channel. But thank you, Nathen, and I will see you hopefully sometime soon, my friend.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me, Jack.
You're welcome.